So I'm here with Paul Konik. I was about to say Harry Konik Jr. like you taught me beforehand.
No, much simple. K-O-N-I-K, 5 letters, much less easier than Harry Konik Jr.
Yes, very much so. So, Paul, you're well regarded through the entire radio industry in this country as being both a real talent but also a survivor, and clearly for anyone who's heard you speak in the last 30 seconds, you've definitely got a voice. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about your career in general, but I like to kind of start at the end and then go back to the start. Mm-hmm. That's just to mix things up a bit on this show. With radio now being, I think, the better part of 12 months in the rear vision mirror, is there anything that really sticks out to you that you miss most day to day?
Well, I don't actually miss it because it's so different now. It's gone through stages, and every decade it's different. And now it's a little, in a way, to my way of thinking, a little less personal because of networking and automation. So nowadays, years ago, a radio station would be very local. 3CS Colac would be in Colac, and 3NE Wangaratta would be in Wangaratta, and 3SR Shepparton would be in Shepparton. Nowadays, you don't know where things come from. They're owned by networks, and it could be there's a lot of satellite programming, which comes from mainly Melbourne, sometimes Sydney, and a lot of it's recorded because a network can use an announcer. So if someone goes on holiday or whatever, they just record from somewhere else, and you don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And I don't miss that. I couldn't really do that. To me, that's too impersonal. I mean, that's the way it is now. It's modern day radio. But people ask me, do I miss it? No, I don't.
Yeah, right. Well, that's an honest answer. That's what we like. So, obviously, I have stressed in the past, and also Paul and I talked about before we started today, I don't want this to be a radio podcast because it's meant to be about the area. I just find speaking to radio people to be entertaining and also really, really great on the editing side because you're so good at it, just speaking in general. With the networked shows, I understand it because I am a bit of a radio nerd when it comes to that drive slot. Because in the afternoons, if you've got a show of the quality of Kate, Tim and Marty, which is probably the biggest or the most loved show in the country at the moment, it must be so hard to think that we're going to have anything on in the afternoon locally that can compete with the best show that's on Australian radio at the moment. That's just my opinion, but it's right up there. So outside of that slot, where to me the networking thing makes a little bit more sense from a business perspective, nothing else. Yeah. Why would networks be pushing those network programs into other parts of the day? Like, what, in your opinion, what's the
money?
Yeah, it's
money.
But it wasn't the entire industry. The business case of radio was built on that local thing.
Well, it was. Well, it isn't anymore. You see, in the case of locally, 3NE Wangaratta was started in 1954 and was a local radio station. In those days, before automation, everything was local. It'd be between 5, 6 to up to 8 announcers at all the country stations.
All local.
All local.
Wow.
And from start to finish, and stations would open about 5:30 or 6, and they'd be off the air by 11:30. And it was all live announcers. The breakfast guy would be followed by the morning guy and so forth. Well, nowadays, for a start, partly because of wages, people, I guess, can't afford that. And so networks buy a station and add it to the network. So a lot of stuff comes from elsewhere, like the talk shows, like Neil Mitchell comes from Melbourne, and the All Night comes from Melbourne, and like the Oath Radio Network that now owns 3NE. And there's 3 networks in Victoria. There's Southern Cross Austereo, there's Ace Radio, and there's Grant Broadcasters. That's it. They own everything in Victoria. There's not a single independent radio station. 3NE was the last independent station in Victoria.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. That's pretty crazy.
So, the other thing is that most stations, or most networks, even if most of the day comes from somewhere else, at least breakfast is local. Whereas, see, at Ace Radio, the breakfast session comes from Warrnambool.
Okay.
That's a guy called John Vertigan and a girl called Kate Mees. So John and Kate, they come out of Warrnambool, and there's 9 stations in the network, and that's where it comes from. So even the breakfast is not local. So a lot of the local news and information you get, like late trains, or if you're running for a plane at Albury Airport, Albury's fogged in, you can't, the planes are late, etc. All that's gone.
And I've said in the past, I'm not sure on the show, but I have said to many people that I guess I'm more of a fan of the talents of the people themselves that are on radio, more so than the format of the product itself. Yeah. And it's probably why I don't spend a massive amount of time on morning radio, because So, like, it's just, like, in Albury, for example, it is local.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether that's just a fortunate byproduct of the fact that it's been the hub of previous stations, and it's where a lot of extra production gets done and things. So the station has a certain amount of resources. Yeah. But could you imagine when you were starting out that a market the size of Wangaratta, which granted is always bigger than I remember it is every time I come here, like I was like, wow, there's a lot of... You told me go through 3 roundabouts, and I was like, wow, this is about 4 kilometres. There's a lot of people here. Did you ever think that there would be a market this size that wouldn't have their own local radio, like their own breakfast show, particularly breakfast, because it's the big market in our country? Mm-hmm. Did that even cross your mind?
Well, Southern Cross Austereo, their focus is on breakfast being local. So wherever you go where there's a Southern Cross Austereo station, like what is now Hit FM and Triple M, which used to be Star and River, the breakfasts are local, and then the rest of the day might come from somewhere else. So at least they stick to that. Whereas Ace Radio have their breakfast comes from Warrnambool, and Grant Broadcasters, the other network, they do pretty much the same thing. In fact, they're local a lot more of the day. Like they own 3BA Ballarat and Power FM, and what used to be 3GL, which is now K-Rock and Bay FM. They're pretty much not only local in breakfast, a couple of other shifts are local as well. So every network's got different plans and different philosophies, but basically a lot of it's around money, and I understand that. I think if I owned a radio station, maybe I'd do the same thing, that it's easier to automate and so forth, and then say that the afternoon guy goes on holidays, rather than hire someone to fill in, you just get someone else in the network to do that 3 or 4 or 5 hours, and you save $1.
Yeah, and I guess their reasoning would be also not just monetary, that's a known quantity.
That's right.
That talent that we're bringing on there is someone we trust to be able to carry a shift.
That's right.
It just, to me, the global markets that are, well, in the past, you might have been able to say were competitive with the quality of the Australian market in the radio world, like North America. They went down that path so far that those companies are filing record level bankruptcies.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They networked to the point that the industry almost fell apart.
And Cumulus, they've overbought.
Yeah.
Well, see, if you go anywhere in the English-speaking world, not so much England, but the USA, Canada, Australia and New Zealand are all the same. So if you're in Queenstown in New Zealand, there's a station called Coast FM that comes from Auckland, and that just covers all of New Zealand, North and South Island. So there's no difference. Australian radio has just followed what's happened overseas. And you're quite right that iHeartRadio, which used to be Clear Channel Communication, became iHeart. And there's another mob called Cumulus, which is the second biggest. And Enacom, I think, is another one, which is used to be CBS. They've overbought. They bought that many stations that they're now all bankrupt.
It just seems like if you're seeing it fail in an even bigger market, that the business, like the strength of the actual execution on that, has to be almost perfect for it to work.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't want to sit here and bitch and moan about the state of the radio business with someone that's had such a great career, so we might just move into your...
Yeah, I'm just saying it's different, and things change every decade or so. There's new technology. See, I started off with turntables. I used to spin a disc on a turntable.
Yeah.
And then the ads were on disc as well. And then later on, we got a thing called Spotmaster, where a thing was on a master cartridge. And then computers started. So every year, or every decade, things change. New technology, new ideas, and people obviously pinch a lot of stuff from the States. Yeah. So there's a trend in the States, so let's follow there. And it's just one of those things. There's nothing you can do about it, and you either like it or you don't. Before
we really knuckle down on Paul himself, I think the thing that gets to me is that these are huge companies. Some are in the billions of dollars, and there's a few great shows that are around at any one time. When really, if you were talking about a golden age of some other product like music in the 70s or the rock and roll in the 70s, you could legitimately have an argument that who is the best rock band that's playing on this festival from 1 to 10? There was 10 all-time great things happening at the Pink Floyd, Queen, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones were well enough and running, Aerosmith. There was endless numbers of bands, and they were all around the globe, and there was a legitimate conversation to be had that why isn't there more shows of the level of Hamish and Andy or Kate, Tim and Marty, or some of them brought, like the morning shows that come out on AM in the different cities around Australia. Like, there's really seems to be only one or two great examples of things happening at a time, whereas in the past there was a genuine argument as to every station had their show that they could put up.
Yeah, well, that's the same things happened with television. When television first started in Australia, there was local TV, AMV4 in Albury and GMV6 in Shepparton. And there was a local footy show and there was a local morning show and there were local stars in Shepparton and Albury and whatever, GLV10 down in Traralgon and so forth. Well, that's all gone. It's all network now. It all comes out of Melbourne and or Sydney, and everything you watch is a national show. It's just a trend, and that's the way it is, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just moved on.
Yeah, I guess you're right. And there's that little tinkling of that small bit of business brain that I do have, that I understand the economics of why they're doing it. It'd be just good that if everything that was national had the quality of something that deserved to be national. That's just all where I'm coming from. And particularly on the particular moment, radio is obviously way out in front of television when it comes to strong products across the board at that level, but some of the TV that makes it national.
Well, it's easy to be critical, and I am, and people say to me, well, hang on a second, what would you do if you ran a radio station? You think, oh, hang on, because it's very, very expensive to run a radio station. It costs a lot of money. So even if you make a lot of money, once you've paid everybody off, you've got to look at the margin, and you think, well, we've worked so hard for this small amount. Yeah. So obviously, if you find a shortcut, you take it.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess I would too.
Very good. So when we're talking about shortcuts, you certainly didn't have one of those in your own career. So no. We'll just talk about it, and then maybe this has been talked about recently in a great article in the Boredom Mail, which I'll link to in the show notes of this episode if you wanted to read that. But I was hoping that maybe we could skip over certain parts of the career. We might just mention how you moved around, but really knuckle down on certain places that you were at. So I understand that what got the bug going for you, you contracted the radio disease. Wanting to be a DJ was from either, or possibly both, a station to a 3UZ and 3KZ in Melbourne.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yep.
So how old were you when?
Well, I was a 15-year-old kid at high school, and DJing had just started, and the Top 40 started, and the UZ and KZ were the two top stations as far as teenagers were concerned. And I rang a jock called Stan Rofe one day, and labels were the big deal. No one cares now. But in those days, there was a record called Pink Shoelaces by Dodie Stevens, and it was on a little label called Crystalette. And what happened in America, still does, that a big label would buy something, there'd be a regional hit, and the big label would buy it, and then it'd become a national hit. Anyway, he said that's on ABC Paramount, and I rang up and I said, in those days you get to a jock fairly quickly. Yeah. I rang him up and I said, look, you're wrong, that label's Crystalette, it's not ABC Paramount. And he said, well, actually, you're right, but he said the bigger label bought the smaller song. That's how it's our national hit. And he said, you sound like you're pretty interested in music. And I said, yes, I am. He said, would you like to come and have a look around the studio one day? And I said, fine. So I went in and I had a look around the studio and watched him work and so forth, and got the bug. And there was another guy in 3UZ called Jeff Haynes, and they were great rivals, so I couldn't tell either of them that I knew the other one. So I got to know Jeff Haynes, and he asked the same thing. He said, come and have a look around. So I had a look around. So those guys were my idols, and I thought this is the way to go. And also I thought I couldn't see me doing a 9-to-5 office job, and I thought this was pretty cool. These guys 2, 3 or 4 hours on the air and that's it. I didn't realise they had other duties, because from the outside I thought that's all they did, but they did other things. Right. Anyway, so that's how it all started.
Okay, so just on that, when you're talking about other duties, I mean, that's something that's across the board for any creative person, that if they are at the top of their field, they're normally not just doing that one thing. They're very good at something else that maybe is why they managed to roll through the ups and downs of getting to the point where they're really great.
Well, from the outside, you don't know that.
They might have been, I mean, in radio, they could have been a music programmer or something else. I mean, what were these particular gentlemen that you were a fan of? What were they doing outside of their on-air that was keeping
Well, it's not so much outside. They're still doing things like Stan Rofe did a show called Platter Parade, which initially started off at 5 to 6:30. I thought, hour and a half a day. What a great gig.
That's pretty great.
But what I didn't know is that he had 6:30 to 7:30 6:30 off to have dinner, and then he went back and did 6:30 or 7 to midnight.
Okay,
So he did another 4 or 5 hours. I didn't know that because I didn't listen. I found out eventually, but initially I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And a lot of these guys, they had other things. They were up, station promotions, and they had to go to outside broadcast and store openings and the other duties.
Yeah, okay, so they weren't just in the mythical, magical studio all the time.
No, well, because as a listener, that's all you knew.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, that's the same I found when I was playing in bands. I mean, we're never a professional band, but there was, beyond the songwriting and the actual performing, like rehearsing and then performing, there was another 100 jobs if you wanted the band to function even at the, at the lowest level. There was still another 100 jobs, and you had to work really hard to get good at any of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's sometimes
the
hidden
things.
The hidden things. Oh, yeah. I mean, we don't want to get too derailed on a philosophical topic, but it is those things quite often that allow you to get good at your main endeavour. So you did the hard yards, and from what I understand, you went to announcing school, which, I mean, me hearing you speak, it's clear that your voice is highly trained. Was that a tough slog? What sort of time frame does that happen over? Is it an intense few months, or is it over a couple of years?
Depends on the jobs available. See, nowadays, this is another thing that's a bit of a beef with people who, of my vintage who are in radio, that we used to go to school. Nowadays, guys walk off the street virtually. There's ex-footballers, ex-sportsmen, stand-up comics, various people who, because of their fame, were asked to go on radio, and that's a sort of an identity and fame thing. Whereas years ago, if you wanted to get into radio, number one, you went to a radio school. And there were 2 in Melbourne, one called Lee Murray's and the other one was called Vincent's, and you're either a Vincent's man or a Lee Murray man. And as soon as you got your first job, you'd arrive. That was the first thing people would ask, you're a Murray man or a Vincent's man? And so you went to school usually 2 nights a week, be an hour and a half, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever, and you did it until he got a job, And what the radio school would do, he'd take his 5 or 6 or 7 best people, and he'd know there was a vacancy at 2AY Albury or 3SH Swan Hill or whatever, and he'd send off a tape with 3 or 4 or 5 voices. Well, none of them might get the job, but one of them might, and that's how it worked. And he would act as your agent as well. He'd train you and then act as your agent, and that's how you got your job. This is going 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah, okay. And what were those particular gentlemen like on the negotiation of contracts for you on that first contract?
Well, it's
clearly they were good at the voice training part.
Well, there weren't no contracts in the country. You just applied for a job and you got the job, and the money was not terrific, but you did it because you wanted to get into the business and foot in the door and all that kind of business. And I know various people who make more money than I was in other jobs who had to drop money to get the radio, to drop money to become famous, become a radio guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that when people move out of something like football, there's only a limited number of opportunities that they can make that same kind of money in, and maybe a big radio slot seems like a great opportunity. Something with a really high-end stand-up that I never quite understood was they either don't sleep, these guys, or they're sacrificing part of their stand-up potential to be on, particularly if they're on the morning radio shift. Like, when does stand-up happen? It's happening at night time.
Late at night.
So they're either coming in and not doing a good job of the radio, or they're stand-up suffering, or they're just an alien.
Yeah, so I think they probably drop. A lot of them drop stand-up when they've got a gig. They've got a morning gig. That's it.
Well, I know I keep coming back to Marty, Kate, Tim and Marty, but it's really the person that I really admire is Marty Sheargold, and I think he may have done what you did. And that's when he realised that he was really...
You can't burn the candle at both ends.
If you want to be exceptional as a stand-up or on the radio or at anything, if there's 2 options, you really need to dedicate yourself to one if you want to be truly exceptional.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a fair bit of prep in a show, so they'd have to get up once again. They might do 6 to 9 on air, but they might be in the studio by 5 or 4:30 or something, putting stuff together.
So is that something, and we might just move on, your first job, from what I can tell, was in West Gippsland? 3UL?
3L Warrigal, yeah.
Yeah. So was that... The preparation side is something that comes up with people in any kind of content business, as that's where the real work is. And the performance part is quite often the fun bit where you get to execute the great joke or the good story or whatever. Was that something that you also were trained, or was that a learn on the job?
No, that's a learn on the job thing. You sometimes you try and just fly by the seat of the pants. You turn up and talk off the top of your head, and sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't.
Yeah.
But I would do half and half. I'd do a bit of prep, and then a lot of it was off the top of the head to react to what had just happened. You hear the news like Peter Talk died yesterday. I was on air one day, and Robert Kennedy had been assassinated in Los Angeles. So news flash came in, and they said, stop the record, announce the fact that Kennedy's been killed. So I had to stop the Monkees record and say, well, Dr. Kennedy's been killed, and so forth. Well, you can't prepare for that.
No.
It just happens, so you react, and I made a comment, and away we went again. There's some things you can prepare for, others you can't, and sometimes you prepare stuff and you then can't use it because something else comes up.
Yeah. Okay. So with that preparation process, because I'm assuming when you're writing for a highly formatted kind of content business where there's time limits and you need to hit certain production elements, and there's formatics to the whole business. If you're in the morning, I'm assuming people want the weather and the time, etc.
All that extra stuff, yeah.
How did you, let's just maybe cover a few of these places that you went in between. How did you see your own development as a preparer? Did you find over time that you found your own methods for getting to the good stuff quickly?
Well, I was a great newspaper reader. Okay. And when I say that, I would go through the paper from front page to back page, and quite often papers have a little gap that they can't fill, and they fill a little tiny story that's about the size of a postage stamp. There might be something about a rare beetle being found, or a man bites dog, or a weird little story, and I would read those things, and people say, where do you get that stuff? And I'd say, well, out of the paper. You can get it too if you really go through it as strictly as I do, because I wouldn't just go to the headlines. I'd go to all this little tiny stuff at the bottom of a page, and it might be some weird little story. I can't think of an example, but I did a lot of that stuff, yeah.
Well, you actually told me a weird little story in our pre-chat that we had a few weeks ago, which I'll bring up in a minute. And I just wanted to highlight, and some of the younger people that are listening to this, not obviously most of the people listening to this show are not going to want to be in the radio. They might be interested in it like I am, but it could be for any creative endeavour. You did some hard yards when it came to moving. Someone's trying to break something. Yeah, so I might have the chronology wrong here, but there was 2XL in Cooma.
Yeah.
2QN in Deniliquin.
Yeah.
Then I found several references to a 3KZ and a 3UZ in Melbourne. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the chronology. I went to 3 Warrigal, and I was given 3 months probation. And the manager thought that I was a trained announcer, experienced announcer is the word I'm looking for. And when he met me at the station and took me to the 3 and showed me around, a guy called Colin Cameron, now retired as well. And he was quite happy and jovial and amiable and affable until he said, how does this station compare to others you've been at? And I said, well, Mr. Cameron, I haven't actually been to any at all. And he said, what? And he left me standing in the record library and ran down to his office, and I followed him down, not knowing what else to do, and he left the door open, and he rang the network program manager, said, you've sent me another cadet. I said, I'm not a training place. I don't want another cadet. Why'd you send me? And if I could see myself not having a long career, and sure enough, as soon as I got to day 91, the 3 months was up, they called me in and I was fired.
Yeah, okay. Wow.
But then I went to 2XL Cooma, which was, once again, I was offered a 6-week gig there because a guy was going to go to England. And he got to England, he decided he'd like to stay there. So within 2 weeks, he rang up and said, I'm not coming back. So they said, well, you can stay. So that was my second gig. Yeah. Then I went to 2QN, and then my first Radio City gig was 3UZ, which at that time, and no one can understand this nowadays because things are different, but in those days 3UZ was the number one station in Melbourne, and it was the highest rating station in Australia, so it was like Hollywood, to get a job at 3UZ was like dying and going to heaven. So and there are only 8 jocks, so you're a star. You go to a party and say, what people say, what do you do? I work in radio. Where I'm at 3UZ. 3UZ. That was considered to be a very big deal.
Okay, so you've made that sound like a bit of a meteoric rise, but what sort of time frame was that happening over?
Oh, well, I'll tell you exactly. 3 months at Warrigal, I got fired. I was at 16 months at 2XL. I quit there without a job to go to.
Okay.
I had to work for a couple of months. Then I went to 2QN, and I was only there 6 months, and I got the gig at 3UZ. So that was a very short time there. And then 3UZ was 2 years. Then I went to 3XY. I was there for about 4 years. And then I was offered a job in the record business, and I was promotions manager for Warner Brothers Records.
Okay, wow.
And that was a big time because Warner's at that time, they had bought Atlantic and they had bought Elektra. So they had the Doors, they had the Stones, they had Led Zeppelin, and, unbelievable. And normally you'd just go into a record shop. I was only PR, I wasn't selling. But people say, can we have this, can we have that? I mean, we sold Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull. That was a gold record before it was released.
Wow.
Just on orders, that's how big that was at that time.
That's huge.
So that was a fascinating time to be in. And then I went to a smaller company called Image. They had Daddy Cool and Eagle Rock and a company and Rick Springfield and a few other people. Much smaller label. And then I went back to radio. Then I went to 3KZ.
Okay. So before I forget my small story that was really interesting, and it's something that I tried to confirm with my dad both last night and this morning, but he mustn't be at home at the moment. He might be visiting his girlfriend in apparently Corryong in your travels, because I'm assuming you may have went through Cooma on a regular basis together. Yeah. There was a Hungarian restaurant in Corryong that you had frequented.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about this? Like, usually my family are the type of family that will tell me every person that's owned every chunk of land in Corryong for the last 150 years and who their grandfather was and their uncle and the dog you never met, etc. So I didn't have any clue that there was any kind of, ethnic food available in Corryong, particularly back then. I'm assuming was it because of the Snowy Mountain scheme at the time?
Oh, I don't know why they were there, but the situation in radio, it's different now. Everyone gets a weekend off. In radio, when I first got in, you worked a 6-day week. You either worked Saturday and Sunday plus the rest of the week. So you had Saturday off or Sunday off. That was it. Okay. Well, in a station like 3 or Warrigal, which is only 60 miles from Melbourne, not a big deal. But Cooma was such a long way from everywhere, and most announcers came from Melbourne. Some would come from Sydney. Too far from Sydney, too far from Melbourne, so they'd advertise a job and no one would go there because they'd figure, what can you do in one day off? I mean, you have to stay in town. But it was kids 17, 18, 19 want to go and visit their mum and dad. So they worked out a situation where you worked 3 weeks without a day off, and then you saved your days up.
Okay.
So I would do Sunday breakfast from 6 to 9. I'd have the rest of Sunday off, then I'd have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off, and all of Thursday till 7 o'clock when I had to come back and do 7 to 11 at night. So in those days, as soon as I finished 9 o'clock on a Sunday, I would head straight off out of Cooma, out of Binnamie, Yukonbeen, over the top into Corryong.
Yeah, okay.
And normally I just keep going. But I noticed that there's this restaurant one day, and I thought, I'll stop and have a meal. So I went in, and the Hungarians ran it, and I had a Wiener Schnitzel, as I remember.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it every time, but I did it a couple of times. And so I stopped and had a meal, and then went on to Wodonga and then down the Hume Highway to Melbourne.
Nice.
So that was 1963, I'm talking.
Well, that would have been a pretty long drive.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
900 and something miles, It took 8 or 9 hours to call. Yeah, because Cooma,
people in Corryong, if you've ever met any of them, they talk about Thredbo and Perisher like they're just a little jaunt up the road.
Yeah.
2 hours later in a car of driving along a road that's not even a road, it's a goat track.
Yeah.
It's a lot better now, obviously.
Yeah. Alpine Way.
You finally get there. And then Cooma's X amount of kilometres past that again. It's basically most of the way to Canberra.
Yeah.
And you were driving that. There was no bypasses on the Hume at that point either.
No.
So how long was Wodonga to Melbourne, just for perspective?
300 kilometres or something.
Yeah. What sort of time, though? Because you would have been driving through Wang, through Euroa.
Well, as I say, we'd do 6 to 9, and everything was live in those days, nothing automated, so I couldn't automate anything. So I did 6 to 9. Until I hit 9 o'clock, I was out of there, and then I'd over the top if there was not snow, like especially if, summer. And I'd go to Wodonga, and then Wodonga to Melbourne. The whole trip would take me 9 hours non-stop, apart from stopping for petrol.
Wow. That's massive. And obviously, when you were in Melbourne, that job in Cooma must have been you must have really been getting a lot out of that to think that 1,800 kilometres 18 hours of driving a week on top of your normal driving you do around up there, but you kept going back to it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So what was it about? Would you say that Cooma job was the formation of you as a professional radio person?
Yeah, in a way, because they let you get away with a bit.
Was that getting Paul, to cut you. Was that getting broadcast into Canberra, or was it hyper?
No, it's 70 k's from Canberra.
Yeah, so no coverage.
I mean, if you're real keen, you might fiddle around. Like we used to listen to 2CA Canberra occasionally, but you didn't get it all the time.
Yeah, okay, right.
Being up in the hills.
Yeah.
But so maybe a broadcast to that area, Cooma, Nimmerabel, Yukonbean, Adaminaby, all that Snow Mountains area.
What was it that was bringing you back every Thursday morning to make that night shift?
Well, a job for a start.
Yeah.
It was an income and hopefully a stepping stone to somewhere else.
Yeah, I guess having lived in Melbourne and my whole family lives there, cousins, all my siblings, Melbourne has a certain gravity to it that something has to be pretty bloody appealing to get you to leave that city, because to people in Melbourne, it's the centre of the universe.
Oh, well, the whole thing is I needed a job, and it was, I would prefer to be in Melbourne, and that's where I was aiming, and that's in those days, that's what everybody did. You went to the city to do your apprenticeship, and that's why the money was so low, because they figured that he's only going to be here 3 months or 6 months, and as soon as he gets a gig in the city, he's gone. Or sometimes be more money at another regional station.
So that pipeline or that apprenticeship system was well and truly entrenched even in those days. So you would develop the bug wherever you happen to yourself in Melbourne and go regional. And then what was the normal kind of way that 2 to 3 stations generally for someone?
Usually 2 or 3. And every now and then, years ago, 3BA Ballarat had a very good reputation, and 7EX Launceston. So if you got to one of those, you're nearly guaranteed to get into the city fairly quickly. But I took 3. I took 3 or Warragul, then 2XL Cooma, and then 2Q, and then Rookwin before I got to UZ. So about 3 stations. And mind you, a lot of people got married locally and had kids and stayed there. They were Melbourne guys, but they liked the country and they stayed there. And I was surprised by the country, because I didn't think I was a country person. I got so used to it, the fact that everything was so close, and you got to know people and so forth. So it was like a club. So I hummed and hard. And when I left then I went back to Melbourne, it took a while to readjust to suddenly be back in a big smoke after being in a small town.
Absolutely. So just so we don't get too tied down for the people listening in call numbers and station names, etc., there was a few things in that part of your career I wanted to focus on before we come forward to your time in Wangaratta. You did a little bit of time at some point. I'm sorry, I couldn't get the chronology quite right on it. At Snow FM.
No, that was a different thing entirely. I had left commercial radio and I'd gone to the ABC.
Yep.
And a guy got in touch with me, and years ago, I was involved in the snow industry. I was a very keen skier. And there was no radio in places like any of the hills. You couldn't get it.
Okay.
And so everyone just had cassettes in those days. You'd swap cassettes and so forth.
Yep.
And some guy got the idea of getting a radio station in the snow, and the government brought out a thing called a narrowcast license, which was only a 2-kilometre radius, and so he started this 3 SNO FM, Snow FM, and we in 1989, I think, or earlier than that, we got a license, and the control board wouldn't give us a license for one hill. We wanted just Falls Creek. Reasons known only to themselves. They said you can't have a license for Falls Creek for 3 months, but you can have a license for Mount Hotham for a month, Mount Buller for a month, and Falls Creek for a month. I said, okay. Right. So that's what we did. So we went to Hotham for a month, and we had to pack up and move to Buller. Then we were there for a month, and then we moved to Falls Creek. We wanted to be most of the time anyway. That's where our ownership was. The people at Falls Creek owned the station.
Okay.
So it was the first station in the snow, and of course, as soon as 2AY, Albury and 3NE and all these other stations thought, hey, there is a market.
There's a proof of concept,
They made sure they got another transmitter or up their power or whatever, so more or less.
So you guys were just the crash test dummies up there?
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, someone had to start it. We were the pioneers when they realised that there was a market.
Yeah.
Because our biggest client was Carlton United Breweries, which in those days, 25 grand for a little backyard little outfit, that was pretty good dough. So,
that's awesome.
And Carlton brought out a brand called Cold Filtered Bitter, and they launched it at Buller, because the top 3 executives of Carlton United Breweries are all keen skiers.
Yeah, okay.
So they launched it at Mount Buller.
Yeah, wow. Just before we move on from that, the ownership that bought the concept to the area only had the station available one of the 3 months that it was up there.
Well, that's right. Well, then the following year, we've ignored Hotham. The following year, we just did Buller and Falls.
Yeah.
And then I think the final year, we just did Falls Creek, and the whole thing just got worse and worse and eventually fell over.
Wow, okay. So you did, yeah, it's always back to money, isn't it? You mentioned that you did some time at the ABC. What sort of time frame was that? What era of the ABC, and also how long were you there for?
I was there 16 years.
Wow.
I got fired from 3KZ, and in 1976, and I was offered a job at the ABC and at 5DN in Adelaide, and I knocked both of them back. Then I got fired, and I rang the ABC. My stupidity, the guy I wanted to talk to was out for lunch. Now, I could have waited an hour, but I panicked. So I thought, he's not available, so I rang Adelaide, and I said, I've changed my mind. I didn't say I was sacked, but I said, I've changed my mind. And so I went to 5DN, and it was a disaster. I hated it from the minute I got there. I resigned after 8 days.
Wow.
They talked me into staying, and then I got to the 5-week mark, and I went to the general manager. I said, we are never going to get on. This is a waste of time. And by that stage, he agreed. So I came back to Melbourne, and I rang the ABC, and I said, is the job that I was offered available? And they said, well, that one isn't, but there is another one if you want to do that. And I said, yeah, anything. So I came back to Melbourne, and I stayed 1976 that was, and I stayed with the ABC for 16 years. And what was good about that they were very forgiving, and I learnt television there. I had no intention of getting into TV.
Okay.
I appeared on a show called Uptight, which was on a channel, but now 10, it was ATVI in those days. It was 8 to 12 on a Saturday morning. I appeared on that for nothing.
Yeah.
And then when I went to the ABC, they said, do you want to read television news? And it hadn't occurred to me. I said, oh, yeah, give it a crack. So I had a couple of dry runs, and then I started reading TV news.
Wow. And how, obviously, you would say, besides the fact that you're performing with your voice, how different was something like the news compared to normal day-to-day content creation? Because
a lot different.
You're not entertaining anybody, are you?
Well, you're staring into a camera, and there's other people there, and there's 4 or 5 people on the floor, plus umpteen people in the control room, and the only person that can be seen is you. One time I had to do a story about 2 New Guinea tribes having a fight, and they both had very weird, funny names, and I said to the crew, please don't laugh and crack me up. And, of course, I did, and I said, the Billy Willies had beaten the, Waka Wakas or some bloody thing. The crew started to laugh, and then it cracked me up, and I cracked up on camera, which is not a good thing to do.
Yeah, but that's, I guess, with your career up until that point, whoever you were across from in the studio, if you were doing a shift with more than one person, you would have been encouraged, I would imagine, if they said something funny, to laugh at it.
Yeah.
And then you suddenly got to turn that switch off.
Yeah.
So how long did that take? Did you ever, obviously 16 years, were you involved in the news side that entire time?
Yeah, news, radio, and because they own Radio Australia, which I still have Radio Australia, which is the overseas service.
Yep.
So there was 3LO and 3R, which is the ABC domestically. Then there was Radio Australia, the overseas service of the ABC, plus television. So I was on all 3.
You've had a very long career in radio as a total, and obviously
56 years all up.
How long do you think it felt? Was it until you felt comfortable in that ABC type environment versus a commercial station orientation? Was that a hard transition, or did it take a while? Or?
Well, that's a funny question, because it's a bit of each. Parts of it were very, very good. I mean, they're a good employer in one way. It was very political. You had to watch which side of politics you're on, and it was always very cliquey, so which clique you were with and so forth. So you had to watch that, but I got adjusted to that. So parts of it were very good, parts of it weren't. It was like anything else, I
have heard it said in the past, and I'm not sure off the top of my head who said it, but one thing that they mentioned really defined their time with the ABC as an organisation was, if you're producing content about a situation in the world and you work for the ABC, you have to actually be there to a certain degree.
Yeah.
You can't just sit up in your ivory tower at the top of Fox FM making jokes about something you have no knowledge of or experience.
Yeah. So
was that something that you noticed when you went there, that they want you to actually be in it?
Yeah. Oh, the best thing about them, they were a very forgiving employer, because, as I say, I learnt TV and it was brand new to me.
Yeah.
So I made a few mistakes. Now, in commercial TV, you would have got the flick. I would have said, he's hopeless, you know.
See you later.
Yeah, and sometimes you'd go and apologise and say, look, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have. They'd say, that's okay, you know, you'll be better next time.
Yeah.
And as time went by, you learned all, the floor manager would say, extend what you're saying, or hurry up, or, all the hand signals and all that. And you got to know that. And you started talking TV jargon with the other people.
Yeah, okay.
It's just like anything else, a matter of learning.
Yeah, right. I'm sure there's as much jargon in TV as there is in radio, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
So anyone who's listening who does know, you probably knows that. And I was humming and ahhing, to be honest, Paul, if I was even going to bring this up, because I'm sure you've talked about it 100 times, but I thought this is a chance for at least no other reason but the fact you get to say the quote in full, as you would have said it on the radio. Bad swear words included, if you're comfortable with that. I know you've had a few run-ins with different John Farnhams, different eras of John Farnham.
Yeah.
So I think there was two, but the one that I guess made the third part, I think page 3 of The Sun, etc., was you were trying from memory. I'll let you tell the story, but I'll just set it up. This is how I knew it was going to be funny. As soon as I read the words, I was trying to use the talkback to talk to the engineer.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'll let you take it from there, but can you just take us through that story?
Well, at most radio stations, the microphone is either on or off. But at 3KZ, they had a 3-way thing that went from off to halfway, which would turn the speakers off. So if you're on the phone, you put it halfway and you'd have silence in the studio. And then you clicked it one more time to be on. Well, I thought I was on the halfway mark where I just had the speakers are off. Actually, I had left the mic on, and I was looking for this guy. This is one of the dangers in radio, is that the intercom goes through the mic, which should never happen. If I owned a radio station, the intercom would be separate. But a lot of stations, and I've heard people just talking, not saying anything bad, but
just having a chat.
Yeah, I was listening to 3UZ one day, and Alan Lappin was on the air. He said, at the end of this record, we'll have traffic come in car 1. So I rang 3UZ and it said, Alan's mic is leaking. I mean, he wasn't saying anything wrong.
Yeah.
But I did. I said, where the F is everyone in this shit house joint? Which
it's just a great quote.
Yeah, so page 3 in The Sun, and my ratings went up.
Wow. Well, that just shows that people like a bit of honesty, don't they?
But the Farnham connection was that I was playing John Farnham a song called Everything Is Out of Season. And years later, I was at at Mount Buller at Snow FM, and Farnham was up there skiing. So I said, come and be interviewed. So we're chatting away, and we finished the interview, and I went to a song, but I left the mic on. So we're chatting over the top of the music, and someone rang. I pick up the phone and said, hello, Snow FM, and they said, your mic's still on. So I turned the mic off and I said, Farnham, you've done it to me again. And he said, don't blame me. Nothing to do with me.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously something like that you get a massive fine for now, but people push really close to that line a lot more often than maybe what they used to.
Hey,
so,
mate, the word I used, you listen to Triple J, they say it every 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's it, yeah. I mean, this show is full of swearing, but we've managed to not swear at all today, which is great. So where the F is this guy in this S house of a place or thereabouts? Was this a situation where was someone hotlined to you when you were on the air, or did you have to wait to get... I think you were suspended from memory for...
Yeah, I was suspended. I mean, it was a bit of a trick.
Was that something where they just ring you and just say, sorry, buddy, get off?
Oh, no. The program director came in and yanked me off air. I was doing 4 to 7, and I got to 4:15, and that's as far as I got.
15 minutes in?
Yeah, 15 minutes into the show, and they dragged me off the show. And one of the guys who had preceded me was still on the building, came and said, what did you say? I said, what did I say about what? And he said, what did you say on air? I said, I didn't know what he was talking about, not thinking it had gone to air.
Wow.
Anyway, then the program director came and said, I think you should come off the air now. And someone had to replace me, and I was sent home. And, of course, next day I was page 3 in The Sun.
Yeah, because at that time, was there a more wholesome artist than John Farnham at the time?
No.
It's almost like you said it over the top of Play School. So
that's right.
Yeah. So you've had a few run-ins with Farnham. That's awesome. Is there any other stories from... Obviously, these are things that I've been able to find, but is there anything when you think back, Paul, a funny story for your period pre-Wangaratta that really still stands out in your mind? Obviously, it doesn't have to involve anyone famous, just...
No, not really. One of the things, well, this is a famous story. Amazing. Of all the people I met, people ask me this question all the time. Since I've retired, I've given a couple of talks to elderly folk and at homes and whatever. And they say, who did you meet? And so I rattle off, the various people I met. And I find that it's nearly a cliche with me now that the bigger they were, the nicer they were.
Yeah, right.
People who were the real idiots and fools were some crappy fifth-rate band from Perth or something that had one hit.
Right, okay.
And they'd make an arrangement for an interview and they wouldn't turn up, or they'd turn up late and whatever. Yet some of the biggest stars were the nicest stars. Like you may remember in the article that Bobby Rydell, I interviewed Bobby Rydell. He comes to Albury occasionally, and I haven't seen him for years, but he kept calling him Mr. Konik. And I said, no, I'll call you Bobby and you call me Paul, let's make it friendly. He said, of course, yes, Mr. Konik. And I said, no, you still haven't got it. No, I stopped the tape and I said, don't call me Mr. Konik. Yeah. And then I met Roy Orbison at a function. And so we met, but not wasn't buddies, but we met. And whenever anyone came up to the studios at 3KZ, we were used to the entourage. So the star would come up with his girlfriend, hairdresser, manager, his musical director. There'd be 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 people with the star. Only one was going to get interviewed, but he'd come
some
up
random guy, depending on their drug habit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So one time the doorbell rang. We had a security door, and I went to the door, and there's Roy Orbison. I looked over his shoulder and said, where's everybody else? Yeah. He said, there's nobody else. I said, you're here on your own? He said, yeah.
Not even security?
No, nothing.
Wow.
And I said, how'd you get here? And he was at the Southern Cross Hotel in 3KZ. It was in the Trades Hall in Lygon Street.
Yeah, okay.
And I said, how'd you get here? He said, and he looked at me like I was stupid. He said, I walked. I said, you walked?
Wow.
This great star. And I thought, he probably passed umpteen people in the streets and said, gee, that looked like Roy Orbison.
Yeah.
Well, it was.
That's awesome. Just on Roy Orbison, everyone thinks that they have an idea of Roy Orbison because they've seen a sign for the 400,000 tribute bands there are to Roy Orbison. Yeah. If you were to put into perspective how famous that gentleman was, I think a lot of people think he's just like one of those people that was one of those old artists that people do tributes of. How famous would you say that he is, if you put it in a modern perspective? Oh,
look, he was huge. He was a one-man Beatles. A festival hall that has a seating capacity of nearly 7,000 people. He sold the joint out, and he had a hit called Running Scared. And I remember one time he sang it in its entirety 7 times, because every time he sang it, people would yell and scream. In the same set? Yep.
Wow,
and he sang it again, and after he sang it for the 7th time, he said, that's it. He said, I've got other songs to sing, and they finally let him go. But he was huge. Everything he did was, if not number 1, it'd be 2 or 3, and it'd be top 10. Everything. Yet, one of the things about him, he was one of the most humble, totally no ego type people I've ever met. He knew what he did was a job, and he would turn up on time, he'd do his gig, white shirt and tie and a suit.
Yeah.
And his dark glasses. Yep. And he'd sit there and he made hardly any movement. He'd have his guitar and he didn't jump around and do anything. He'd just sit there and do his songs. And he was huge.
It's just a different era, wasn't it? He was famous for the quality of what he did on record and on stage. Like that was why that's why people went crazy for him, not because of looks or his social media followers or some crazy shit that he did when he wasn't famous. It was all about quality songs and performing them well. Yeah, it's a different time.
He was very big. And as I say, while I'm on the subject, with Johnny O'Keefe and Cole Joy and Neil Sedaka and Henry Mancini and I don't know how many other people, the bigger they were, the more humble they were, and the terrific interview. They never gave me any trouble. They turn up on time. They do the interview.
Professionals.
And I interviewed Charlie Pride, and I said to him, look, I've got to be honest. I said, I know nothing about you. I said, I know you're a black country singer. And that's all I know. He said, that's cool. He said, mate, we'll fake it, Yeah. So he just rabbited on. He wanted to be a professional baseball player, and but he got into country music and rah-rah. And he was fantastic. He was just a lovely bloke.
Righto. So, Paul, I just wanted to move forward a little bit now to your time in Wangaratta. It's probably why most of the people are listening now, because it's a local-based podcast. So I know in Albury there were a few long-term people. Like different shows have had a fairly decent run on the morning programs. but I'm not sure about 2AY. To be honest, I don't really listen to it, so I'm not sure about there. But you've had what could only be called a pretty epic career here.
Yeah, well, 16 years. Well, most, as we said earlier, that country radio is used as a training ground for most young kids. You know, they come from Melbourne or Sydney. They want to get out of there fast, you know, so 6 months, a year, whatever. So the average of a radio announcer, a young kid who comes to the country, boy or girl, they maybe 3 years as an average. Some might do 1 or 2, some might do 3, but by that stage, they either move to a bigger regional station or they got their gig in the city. Well, because I've done it the other way around. I came from the city. I'd actually given up radio. I was running a restaurant in Melbourne. I owned a restaurant and called Turntables, by the way.
Okay, very good. What'd you serve? What sort of cuisine was it?
A bit of everything. My chef used to call it eclectic, whatever that means.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway.
That sounds like he couldn't be bothered designing a menu.
Yeah, a bit of everything. Yeah, so I came the other way around, and I came here for a reason that my then wife, my second ex-wife, I've got 2 of them now, we had a horse stud, an Arabian horse stud in just outside of Wodonga.
And for anyone who's not local, how far away is that exactly, just for
87 kilometres.
Yeah, it's an epic drive.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to cut you off.
Yeah, so that's why I came here. And to be honest, I would have been happy for a non-radio job. You know, I figured I'd had enough of radio and had a restaurant. So I applied for cellar door manager, the Elgin's pub in Wodonga, advertising for a manager they were going to put in a prestige upmarket wine section, and applied for that, and I had interviewed and chatted away and nothing came of that. And so I applied for jobs that were non-radio jobs, and I had got them, that would have been that. But as time went by and I couldn't find anything, and I was living in Melbourne and I was coming up on weekends to the farm. My then wife was already on the farm running it, and so I thought, might be radio. So yep. I just rang 3NE cold and spoke to the general manager and said, look, I'm coming up to move up there. So I actually have a property, but I'm still living in Melbourne. And any chance of a job? And he said, well, I've got nothing going at the moment. He said, but if I find something, I'll call you. And of course, nothing happened. 11 months went by and I thought, it's the end of it. You know, it's one of those, gone. And he rang out of the blue and said, when can you start? I said, who is this? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, who's this?
Sorry, who is this? What? And he said, breakfast announcer resigned yesterday. He said, you got the gig. Wow. And so that was it.
Awesome. And
it wasn't going to be a 2 or 3 year thing for me trying to get to Melbourne. I wanted to get up here. So 16 years later.
Wow, that's incredible. So what did you know about the station or Wangaratta in general?
Well, I knew a lot about Wangaratta because I used to come via here. My favourite pub was the Northo here, the Northeastern Hotel.
Yep.
And I used to come here and we'd have a few drinks there and we'd go on to Mount Buller or Falls Creek or whatever. So I came through Wangaratta quite a bit and I thought it was quite a nice town. And then in 1993, I was hired by the National Party to do the ads, the famous election that John Hewson lost, that he wasn't going to lose but did. And Keating was going to lose but didn't.
Yeah.
And there was a guy called Philip Puller who was then the candidate for the National Party. And I did 2 things. I came up and I did some training on how to appear on television because he never appeared on television in his life.
Yep.
And I did all the ads for the National Party, which I did all the radio ads at 3NE. And I did all the TV ads at AMV4, as it was then. It was an independent station in Albury, so I did all the television ads, which weren't just voiceover. They weren't in vision. Anyway, so I knew a bit about Wang and knew a bit about Albury.
Were those ads, only running locally on the TV, or were they national on the television?
No. They're just on AMV4, just Albury for the local, for the federal seat of Indi.
Yep.
And 3NE, also. So I had actually been in the place not knowing that, years later I'd be there, working there.
Yeah, right. So let's just talk about these epic drives that you were doing. One of the things that scares me, even though having something to do with the radio business at some point is one of my life goals and ambitions, can you just talk us through your average morning and why, when I think a lot about it, I'm thinking, wow, those hours are tough. Like they sound like horrible hours.
Well, initially the breakfast was 6 to 9 and then it moved forward in half an hour, 5:30 to 8:30, so it changed the time when I got up. But I got up, I tried different times to get up, 4 o'clock, tried 4:30, tried 20 to 4, whatever. And eventually when the breakfast started at 5:30, I was getting up at 3:15 every morning. And of course, on a horse stud, we had 30 horses, 3 cats, 3 dogs, pile of chooks and ducks, and some of those had to be fed, not all of them.
Yep.
So I would get up, the alarm would go, and I'd get up and I'd feed 3 cats. One eventually died, so it got down to 2 cats. And there were 3 dogs. One died, so it was down to 2 dogs. So I'd release, one dog was left alone because he would never go anywhere, but the other one was a border collie. He'd roam, so he'd be on a chain, so I'd let him off in the morning. So I'd do all that, feed a couple of cats and a couple of dogs and have a shower and get dressed. And I had 45 minutes to do that, and by 4 o'clock I had to be at the front gate, and there was one horse I had to feed, which was right in front of the house, so I fed him, and then I'd take off. So I'd leave it, as a time signal for 4 o'clock was going through, I'd have to be at the front gate, otherwise I'd be running late.
Yep.
So it was 17 kilometres into Wodonga, and another 66 from Wodonga. So it was 87 kilometres from the front gate to the 3&E car park.
Yeah, right.
And that took an hour, under 55 minutes.
And this is 5 days a week for 16
5
years.
days a week for 13 years.
Oh, 13.
Yeah.
Oh, because you spent...
Eventually, when my marriage split up, I moved down to Wangaratta, and it was then 5 minutes from the studio.
Yeah. That must have been a bit strange to not have that.
It was good.
Although you... Just talk us through... I mean, there's a lot of careers which require abnormal hours. And, I mean, obviously... There's a lot of heroic careers that require ungodly hours, whether you're a really experienced doctor or in the military or the police force or fire or whatever.
Yeah, more shift work.
Not every person in the content game would choose to want to put themselves through what I heard referenced was by someone, I think he called into their show, quote, "It's like living with permanent jet lag," unquote.
Pretty much.
Just what time are you going to bed, and how much difference would it make if, just say, you got to sleep at 9:30 versus 9 when you woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Like, how much could you feel that in your... You'd have to be feeling that in your bones.
Yeah, you're tired. You're pretty much tired all the time. You're always sleep deprived because some nights you'd have a good night's sleep, which might be 6 or 7 hours, and other nights you'd be lucky to get 3 or 4.
See, I'm getting lost here. How do you get on the radio and be a personality which requires more energy than a normal human has, and you've got to turn it on a little bit to project into... If you talk at your normal pace or normal level of energy, a normal person comes into a radio studio, they'll have the audience falling asleep in 3 seconds because they think they're exciting, but they're not. How did you... I mean, obviously a long career, but after getting up at that time, feeding animals, driving, we all know that particularly that 17 kilometres between where you were based and Albury is probably a foggy death trap, for the lack of a better term.
Yeah, sometimes.
How did you turn up and just have that?
Oh, well, it's showbiz, the show must go on. It's like the curtain goes up, and I remember seeing a movie about the 30s star Eddie Cantor, and he's about to go on stage, and someone hands him a telegram that his mother's just died. So then they announce him, and he goes on stage and starts singing, and they do a close-up of his face, and he's crying, but he's still singing the song and so forth, because you can't disappoint the crowd. So I'd get there, and some days I feel better than others. Some days I have a good night's sleep and you feel pretty good. Other days you wouldn't feel pretty good, but you can't let that show. You can't come
just
on.
For those performers out there, whether they're listening to this and they're into the radio or they're doing a community radio show or comedy or in a band or whatever they're doing creatively. What were did you have any, it sounds a bit douchey to say tools or methods, but what did you do to get yourself up on those days where you were just not feeling like performing? Oh,
well, you realise you're there and just have to do it. And also the audience aren't interested in how you feel. You can't come and say, "Oh, look, I'm really crook today."
Which is part of the problem with a lot of radio now. They seem to think that the audience cares about every second of their personal lives.
Yeah, well, that's right. So I wouldn't do that. So if say I had a sore throat and it sounded like, I'd obviously say, "Look, I'm sorry, I'm a bit croaky this morning because I've got a sore throat," because it was obvious that I did. But if I just felt unwell, but it wasn't obvious, you just go on. There's certain things you have to do. You have to do the weather, you have to do the traffic reports, you have to back announce the music and read bits out of a paper and, comment on something that had happened locally, and you just had to do it. And some days your shows weren't as good as other days, which you would know, but hopefully the public didn't know.
Yeah, I guess that's the key, isn't it? So one thing we didn't cover off, Paul, were you on 3&E? when you got to Wangaratta, was that a solo hosted show? And
Yeah.
did it remain that way your whole 16 years?
Yep.
So it all fell on you in the end?
One-man band, yep.
Did you
One-man
have
band.
any producers, anyone taking calls?
No, I was producer and
So
did the
you were
show.
flat out. So you might not even have had time to think about how you were feeling.
Well, in a way, not. No, for a start, I'd say to myself, I've got 3 hours, I've just got to fake it for 3 hours. I know I feel fantastic, but come 9 o'clock, I'm off, and I can do off-air stuff, because I was music director as well, so I go and sit at a keyboard and pick music and so forth, but that public didn't know what I was doing. So, as I say, some days you'd come off and say, gee, I've done a really good show. And other days you'd think, well, that wasn't fantastic, but you can't win them all, And some days your mood would be affected, but hopefully the public wouldn't know.
That's amazing, particularly having grown up in a household that for a period of time had multiple horses. Knowing they're flighty, they're always ill, everything that's wrong with them costs thousands of dollars if they...
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't matter what happens to them. It couldn't have been... You couldn't have picked a more stressful stud to be running while you were trying to get up at 3 a.m. To be honest, horses are just a different animal altogether. I know that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And were there ever any times where there was just something horrendous happening on the farm that was stressful and you had to just forget about that?
Oh, a couple of things. Well, we had bushfires and things which none of us burned down. But one day I got up and did the full thing, shaved and showered and got dressed and so forth, backed the car out of the garage, and a tree had fallen across the only way out of the farm, across the yard, just right out. And you couldn't, there's no back way, but that was only one way. So all I could do was ring the station and say, look, I'm not going to turn a chainsaw on at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it would take me hours anyway. Yep. So I couldn't make it. I went back to bed, and someone else had to do the show, and there's nothing else I could do. And when I got home that day, I then got the chainsaw out and chopped the tree up, which took me over an hour, which people locally wouldn't have been happy at 4 o'clock in the morning.
No, gosh. And neither would all the horses.
Well, the horses weren't a real problem in the morning. I used to feed one of them. It was right in front of the house, and he had to be fed.
Yeah, okay.
And but the others were all out in paddocks, so they weren't a hassle till later.
That's good. So just on the horse thing, would you have called yourself a horse guy?
No.
So
my wife was the horse person, and I had to learn a little bit about it, but I know more.
That would have been good fodder for the radio, surely, because horse people are unlike any other people.
That's right. You're right about that.
Yeah. I remember, I won't say who it was, but I heard a story about this particular person had a job, and they called into work, basically sick, and they said the following words, quote, I can't come into work. I have to spend the whole night in the shed with my new foal. And they're like, okay, well, that makes sense. Apparently, like the vet had been, it was a difficult birth. What the person that they were calling didn't realise was, when they said, I've got to spend this time in the shed, that wasn't just going to be one night. They wanted to stay in the shed and sleep with the foal next to it for days and days on end.
Yeah.
Like only a horse person would think that's a normal conversation. Sorry, I'm sleeping in the shed for a week.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, that happens. We had foals and things, and usually my wife would be up, and I had to go to work, so I was exempt from having to do anything overnight.
So you might have picked the ideal job by accident.
Yeah, in a way. But I always say about horses that they're dangerous at both ends and uncomfortable in the middle. So, it's not a horse
exactly. So just getting back to doing this drive, it still baffles my mind that you were doing this drive every day.
87 down, 87 back for 13 long years.
I know we'll probably finish up in a minute, Paul, but I recall there being 4 kangaroos in that time and 2 completely totaled cars.
Yeah, well, 2 just bounced off and didn't no damage, hardly a dent, but then 2 really wrecked both cars at that time and
Morning
put me
trips
off the
or evening?
morning. Yeah, no, nothing at night. Not a worry at night. But I see the odd kangaroo of an afternoon, but you'd see it, of course, miles away. But in the morning, as you say, foggy, especially that bit between the farm and Wodonga, get quite foggy, and these things just jump out in front of you, and too late. People say, "Why didn't you stop?" or "Why didn't you swerve?" Well, you can't.
We're not meant to swerve. That's the thing, isn't it?
You're just right out in front of you and bang and gone.
Yeah. I had a friend whose parents, they owned a truck company. And I was talking to them because the band that I was in the 2000s, we had a massive accident involving a kangaroo on the highway coming back from Sydney. And this particular gentleman who's been driving trucks for 30 years or something said, look, the first, second, third, 50th kangaroo, you're always going to swerve. When you hit 1,000 of them like I have, you don't swerve anymore.
No,
so when people say to you, oh, you shouldn't have swerved, which is what we did, unfortunately, like there's no training for that.
No.
That's not part of getting your L's.
Yeah.
how to dodge a kangaroo like that.
Well, you swerve to avoid the kangaroo and hit a gum tree. You know,
Yeah, well, that's it. But it's just
better to knock the kangaroo off. There's plenty of them
It's
around.
instinct. You have to have so much exposure to animals on the road to not swerve.
Yeah,
It's just ridiculous when people say, "Oh, why'd you swerve?"
yeah.
Just
And
piss
then
me
there's
off.
the odd wombat as well. I don't see that many of them, but the odd wombat, they can make a mess of your car. But when I hit one kangaroo on the way to work, and I just smashed out a Magna at the time, just smashed the whole front of it, I could still drive to work. I had the car fixed, and I had it back a couple of weeks, and then I ran over a dead one at the exact same spot that I
gosh.
did one. So, which then stuffed up the undercarriage. I mean,
great.
the kangaroo's already dead, but I didn't know that in the dark. And suddenly I went bang. I thought, what the hell was that? So it was a dead kangaroo.
Wow.
Same spot I hit the other one, but there you go.
Obviously, you didn't get hurt, and it does lead to something I want to leave people with, and it's something that a few people that I've tracked down to try and get onto yourself, and people that have written articles about you across different publications have always said one thing, that you had a boundless amount of energy, but you weren't a joker and you weren't late.
No, never
You
late
were
once.
an entertainer, but you, more than anything, you were a dyed-in-the-wool professional.
Yeah, well, that's nice of him to say that, but it's true. I know, apart from the time the tree fell across the drive and I couldn't get to work.
Yeah. What's like, what do they call that? An act of God.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I had holidays, obviously, like other people, but I was never late. When I was meant to be there, I was never late, not once in 16 years, which is, I mean, human nature, you're late sooner or later. Alarms don't go, or there's you have this system. We have a clock radio plus a phone.
Yeah.
So if one doesn't work, because you have a lot of blackouts in the country, so you've still got to have a backup.
Yeah, that's it.
The clock radio doesn't work, so forth. But can I tell you one story that people
Absolutely.
find sometimes difficult to believe? I was a Chris Christopherson fan, and he came to Melbourne, and I volunteered to compare the show for nothing, just so I could meet him. So obviously they agreed to that. No money changing hands. So and he was at that time married to Rita Coolidge, and they just had a little daughter, Casey. And I thought that she would be in the lesser star, would go out and do the opener, and then he would come on. But they chopped and changed. They didn't do it that way. So he went on, and then she went on, and then they did a duet and whatever. Anyway, he went on, and he came back, and he said to me, well, that's it. I can't go on. I said, what do you mean? He said, I can't go on. I said, what are you talking about? Aren't you going back on? He said, no, I'm going home. I said, there's 6,000 people out there who've paid a pile of money to see you. What do you mean you're going home? He said, I've broken a string. And he said, my voice is terrible. He said, my voice is terrible. I'm sounding terrible. I said, you're going to go home?
Wow.
Are you kidding me?
Jeez.
I said, what's going to happen? He said, Rita can do the rest of the show. I said, no, that's not how it works, Chris. I said, there's 6,000 people out there who've the full house. They've paid a lot of money to see you.
Jeez.
If you don't go out there and sing me and Bobby McGee, they'll tear the bloody place apart. And he said, oh, gee, do you think I'm good enough? Do you think I can do it? And I thought, why am I telling this millionaire superstar, patting him up on the back and feeding his ego and saying, I said, Chris, I think you can do it. Go out there.
You've got a chance.
I had to talk this superstar into going back out there. So as soon as he fixed it, I said, you can fix a string yourself. You don't need anyone. So he changed the string on his guitar. And went out there and went into the opening chords of me and Bobby McGee, and the place went berserk, and he was fine.
Yeah,
and
well.
he's all right after that. And I thought, why am I talking? I'm not working for money anyway, but I'm talking this guy to go back on stage. Couldn't believe it.
That's a good one. You might need to, if you ever want to get back into the working world, mate, maybe you could be a career counsellor for upset entertainers. Yeah. Righto, well, we might leave it there, Paul.
Okay, good on you.
It's been bloody fantastic, and if anyone's still listening to this that helped me track Paul down, I want to say thank you for that. And, yeah, it's been a real pleasure. And, not only a great voice, you turned out to be an exceptional bloke, which is the other thing people said. So, thank you, sir. And
Good on you. Nice to talk to you.
catch you.
Bye.